You fool! Warren is dead. Welcome to HorrorBabble. I'm pleased to present our very first Michael Shea recording today, Fat Face, a mythos novelette first published by Axolotl Press in 1987. The story tells of a lonely working girl in a cheap Los Angeles hotel who begins to fantasize about a strange man living in the building opposite. I hope you enjoy this one, folks. Be sure to leave your thoughts below. And be mindful, Shea stories aren't for the faint of heart. Fat Face by Michael Shea. They were infamous nightmare sculptures even when telling of age-old bygone things. For Shoggoths and their work ought not to be seen by human beings, or portrayed by any beings. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, At the Mountains of Madness. 1. When Patty came back to work in the lobby of the Parnassus Hotel, it was clear she was liked from the way the other girls teased her and unobtrusively took it easy on her for the first few weeks, while she got to feel steadier. She was deeply relieved to be back. Before she had to go up to State Hospital, she'd been doing 4 nights a week at a massage parlor called The Encounter, of which her pimp was part owner. He insisted the parlor beat was like a vacation to her, because it was strictly a handjob operation, and the physical demands on her were lighter than regular hotel whoring. Patty would certainly have agreed that the work was lighter if it hadn't been for the robberies and killings. The last of these had been the cause of her breakdown, and though she never admitted this to Pete, her pimp, he had no doubt sensed the truth, for he'd let her go back to the Parnassus and told her she could pay him half rate for the next few weeks, until she was feeling steady again. In her first weeks at the massage parlor, she had known with all but certainty of 2 clients, not hers, who had taken one-way drives from The Encounter up into the Hollywood Hills. These incidents still wore a thin, merciful veil of doubt. It was the 3rd one that passed too closely for her to face away from it. From the moment of his coming in, unwillingly she felt spring up in her the conviction that the customer was a perfect victim, physically soft, small, fatly walleted, more than half drunk, out of state. She learned his name when her man studied his wallet thoroughly on the pretext of checking his credit cards, and the man's permitting of this liberty revealed how fuddled he was. She walked ahead, swinging her bottom, and as he stumbled after, down the hall to a massage room, she could almost feel in her own head the ugly calculations clicking in Pete's. The massage room was tiny. It had a not infrequently puked-on carpet, and a table. As she stood there, pounding firmly on him through the towel, trying to concentrate on her rhythm, she beheld an obese black cockroach running boldly across the carpet. Afterward, she was willing to believe she had hallucinated, so strange was the thing she remembered. The bug, half as big as her hand, had stopped at mid-floor and stared at her. And she in that instant had seen clearly and looked deep into the inhuman little black bead eyes, and had known that the man she was just then firing off into the towel was going to die later that night. There would be a grim, half-slurred conversation in some gully under the stars. There would be perhaps a long signing of traveller's checks payable to the fictitious name on a certain set of false ID cards, and then the top of the plump man's head would be blown off. Patty was a lazy girl who lazily wanted things to be nice, but was very good at adjusting to things that were not nice at all, if somebody strong really insisted on them. Part of it was that Patty was indecisive by nature. Left alone, she was made miserable by the lonely struggle of deciding what to do. Pete was expensive, but at least he kept Patty's time fully planned out for her. With him to supervise, Patty's life fit her snugly, with no room for confusing doubts. But this plump man's head, all pale in moonlight, blown wide open, the image wouldn't leave her. It festered in her imagination. The body was found in 3 days and got 2 paragraphs, but the few lines included corroboration of her fantasy, in the words, "gunshot wounds to the head." By the time she read these paragraphs, Patty was already half sick with alcohol and insomnia, and that night she took some pills that she was lucky enough to have pumped out of her an hour or so later. But now, with the hospital Xanax just fading from her system and a little of her appetite and her energy coming back, Patty decided that if there was any best therapy for her kind of nightmare, it was this, hooking again out of the lobby of the Parnassus. Some of the bittersweet years of her apprenticeship had been served here. The fat, shabby red furniture still had a voluptuous feel to her. The big, dowdy Parnassus, uptown in the 40s, now stood in the porno heartland of Hollywood. It was a district of neon and snarled traffic on narrow, overparked streets, engineered before the Great Depression. And Patty loved to watch it all. The glitter and glossy vehicles, through the plate glass window of the lobby, taking it easy, only getting up and ambling out to the sidewalk now and then when there was eye contact from a shopping John driving past. This was the way hooking should be. Before this whole massage parlor thing, she was working harder, maybe half her time in the lobby and half walking. But now she felt still queasy, thin-skinned after all those drugs in the hospital. She thought of walking, and it made her remember her painful amateur years. The beatings, the cheats who humped and dumped her, the quick, sticky douches taken with a shook-up bottle of Coke while squatting between trash bins in an alley. Yes, here in the lobby was the best kind of hooking. The old desk guys took a little gate on 1 or 2 rooms, but very few tricks actually went down here. This lobby was a natural showcase. The nearby Bridgeport or Aztec Arms was where 90% of the bedwork went on. This suited Patty. She was small-town born, Central California, and had a certain sunny sentimentalism, an impulse for community and camaraderie, that had led her to be called hometown by some of the other girls, most of them liking her for it while they laughed at her. She laughed along, but stubbornly she cherished a sense of neighborhood on these noisy carnival streets. She cultivated acquaintances. She infallibly greeted the man at the drugstore with cordial remarks on the traffic or the smog. The man, bold and thin-moustached, never did more than grin at her with timid greed and scorn. The douches, deodorizers, and fragrances she bought so steadily had prejudiced him and guaranteed his misreading of her folksy genialities. Or she would josh the various pimply employees at the Dunkorama in a similar spirit, saying things like, "They sure got you working, don't they?" Or, of the tax, "The old governor's got to have his bite, don't he?" When asked how she wanted her coffee, she always answered with neighborly amplitude, "Well, let's see, I guess I'm in the mood for cream today." These things, coming from a vampired brunette in her 20s, wearing a halter top, short shorts, and Grecian sandals, disposed the adolescent counterhops more to sullen leers than to answering warmth. Yet she persisted in her fantasies. She even greeted Arnold, the smudged, moronic vendor at the corner newsstand, by name. This in spite of an all-too-lively and gurgling responsiveness on his part. Now, in her recuperation, Patty took an added comfort from this vein of sentiment. This gave her sisterhood much to rally her about in their generally affectionate recognition that she was much shaken and needed some feedback and some steadying. A particular source of hilarity for them was Patty's revival of interest in Fatface, whom she always insisted was their friendliest neighbor in their local community. An old 10-story office building stood on the corner across the street from the Parnassus. As is not uncommon in L.A., the simple box-shaped structure bore ornate cement friezework on its facade, and all along the pseudo-architraves capping the pseudo-pillars of the building's sides. Such friezes always have exotic clichés as their theme. They're an echo of DeMille's Hollywood. The one across from the Parnassus had a Mesopotamian theme, ziggurat-shaped finials crowning the pseudo-pillars, and murals of wrenched profiles, curly-bearded figures with bulging calves. A different observer than Patty would have judged the building schlock, but effective for all that, striking the viewer with a subtle sense of alien portent. Patty seldom looked higher than its 4th floor, where the usually open window of Fatface's office was. Fatface's businesses, he ran two, appeared to be the only active concerns in the whole capacious structure. The gaudy unlikelihood of both of these businesses was the cause of endless hilarity among the Parnassus girls. The two enterprises lettered on the building's dusty directory were Hydrotherapy Clinic and Pet Refuge. What made the comedy irresistible was that sometimes the clients of the two services arrived together. The hydrotherapy patients were a waddling pachydermous lot, gimping on bulky orthopedic boots, their wobbly bulks rippling in roomy jumpsuits or bib overalls. And, as if these hulks required an added touch, they sometimes came with cats and dogs in tow. These beasts' wails and struggles against their leashes or carrying cages made it plain that they were strays, not pets. The misshapen captors' fleshy, stolid faces, as if oblivious to the thrashings of the beasts, added that last note of slapstick to the spectacle. Fatface himself, they had no other name for him, was often at his high window, a dear, ruddy-bald countenance beaming avuncularly down on the hookers in the lobby across the street. His bubble baldness was the object of much lewd humour among the girls and the pimps. Fatface was much waved at in sarcasm, whereat he always smiled a crinkly smile that seemed to understand and not to mind. Patty, when she sometimes waved, did so with pretty sincerity. Because though you had to laugh at Fatface, the man had some substance to him. He had several collection vans with the Pet Refuge logo. Apparently his hydrotherapy patients also volunteered as drivers for these vans. The leaflet they passed out was really touching. Help us help. Let our aid reach these unfortunate creatures. Nourished, spayed, medicated, they may have a better chance for health and life. This generosity of feeling in Fatface did not prevent his being talked about in the lobby of the Parnassus, where great goiter-rubbing, water-splashing orgies were raucously hypothesized, with Fatface flourishing whips and baby oil, while cries of "Rub my blubber!" filled the air. At such times, Patty was impelled to leave the lobby, because it felt like betrayal to be laughing so hard at the goodly man. Indeed, in her convalescent mellowness, much augmented by Valium, she had started to fantasize going up to his office, pulling the blinds and ravishing him at his desk. She imagined him lonely and horny. Perhaps he had nursed his wife through a long illness, and she at last expired gently. He would be so grateful. But forward though Patty could be, she found in herself an odd shyness about this. It would be easy enough to cross the street and go up to his clinic and knock on his door, but she didn't. A week, 7 nice long convalescent days rolled by, and she did nothing about this sentimental little urge of hers. Then, late one afternoon, Sherry, her best friend among the girls, took her to a bar a few blocks down the street. Patty drank, got happy and goofy. The two girls sat trading yo-mamas and boasts and dares, and then it just popped naturally out of Patty's mouth. "So why don't you go up and give old Fatface a lube?" "Jesus, girl, if all of him's fat as his face, it'd be like lubing a hill." But there was the exploit on the table between them, and they both felt too jolly and rowdy to back down. "So what are you saying? You trick only superstars, so what if he's fat? Think how nice it'd be for him." I bet he blushed till his whole head looked like an eggplant. Then if there was just a slit in the top, like Melanie was saying. Sherry had to break off and hold herself as she laughed. She'd already done some drinking earlier in the afternoon. Patty called for another double and exerted herself to catch up. And meanwhile she harped on her theme to Sherry and tried to get her serious attention. I've been working out of the Parnassus, maybe 3 years now? No, 4. 4 years. I'm part of these people's community. The druggist, Arnold, Fatface, and yet we never do anything to show it. There's no getting together. We're just faces. Like Fatface. I couldn't even call him that. So let's both go up. There's enough there for 2. Patty was about to answer when, behind the bar, she saw a big roach scamper across a rubber mat and disappear under the baseboard. She remembered the plump body in the towel, and remembered, as a thing actually seen, the slug-fragmented skull. Sherry sensed a chill. She ordered 2 more doubles and began making bawdy suppositions about the outcome of their visit. The pair of them marched out laughing a quarter-hour later, out into the late afternoon streets. The gold-drenched sidewalks swarmed. The pavements were jammed with rumbling motors. Jaunty and loud, the girls sauntered back to their intersection and crossed over to the old building. Its heavy oaken glass doors were pneumatically stiff and cost them a stagger to force open. But when they swung shut, it was swiftly, with a deep click, and they sealed out the street sound with amazing, abrupt completeness. The glass was dirty and put a sulphurous glaze on the already surreal copper of the declining sun's light outside. Suddenly it might be Mars or Jupiter beyond those doors, and the girls themselves stood within a great dim stillness that might have matched the feeling of a real Mesopotamian ruin out on some starlit desert. The images were alien to Patty's thought, startling intrusions in a mental voice not precisely her own. Sherry gave a comic shiver, but otherwise made no acknowledgement of similar feelings. They found the elevator had an out-of-order sign fixed to the switch plate by yellowed Scotch tape. The stairway's ancient carpet was blackish green, with a venerable rubber corridor mat up its centre. Out on the street, the booze in Patty's system had felt just right. In this silent, dusty stairwell, it made her slightly woozy. The corridor mat, so cracked with age, put her in mind of supple reptilian skin. Sherry climbed ahead of her, still joking, cackling, but her voice seemed small, seemed to struggle like a drowner in the heavy silence. It amazed Patty how utterly her sense of gaiety had fled her. It had been clicked off, abrupt as a light switch, when those heavy street doors had closed behind them. At the first 2 landings, they peeked down the holes at similar vistas, green carpeted corridors of frosted glass doors with rich brass knobs. Bulbs burned miserly few, and in those corridors Patty sensed, with piercing vividness, the feeling of kept silence. It was not a void silence, but a full one, made by presences not stirring. And, as they climbed, her sense of strangeness condensed in her, became something that gripped her by the spine. She was afraid. My God, what of? It was ridiculous. But when Sherry led them into the 4th-floor corridor, performing a comic bow, Patty's legs felt cold and leaden and carried her unwillingly. "Come on," Sherry mocked. There was something too much, something feverish about the hilarity in her eyes. Patty balked. "It's a bad idea. You win. I'm chicken. Let's get out of here." "Ha! And you call yourself a working girl? Well, just a minute here." She took out the little pad she carried for phone numbers and addresses, and hurried down the hall with a parody butt-swinging hooker's prowl. The doors nearest Patty said, "Hydrotherapy Clinic," with an arrow. She watched Sherry pass other doors, sashaying all the way to the corridor's far end. Patty stood waiting. Did she hear, ever so faintly, a kind of echo from behind these closed doors? So faint, but the echoes of something resonating in a vast, cavernous space. And there, ever so soft, it was almost like the piping of a flute. Sherry stood by the last door, scribbling on the pad. She ripped off the sheet and slipped it under the door. Then she came running back like a kid who's played a prank. Patty willingly caught her mood, They rushed giggling back down the stairs like larking 12-year-olds. Patty wondered if Sherry, too, was giggling from sheer relief to be out of this building. "What did you write him, fool?" Patty was elated to be back on the street, out in its noise and its colours. She felt like someone who has just escaped drowning. "You're trying to steal my date?" Sherry had once tampered with a note that Patty had passed at a party, so that the trick would show up at Sherry's house instead of Patty's. Sherry mimed outrage. "What you take me for? Come on for a beer, on me." As they walked, every outdoor breath reassured Patty. "Hey, Cher, did you hear any, music up there?" Even out here in the traffic noise, she could call up clearly the weird, piping tune. Not so much a tune, really, as an eerie, melodic ramble. What bothered her as much as the strange feeling of the music was the way in which she had received it. It seemed to her that she had not heard it, but rather remembered it, suddenly and vividly, though she hadn't the trace of an idea now where she might have heard it before. Sherry's answer confirmed her thought. "Music? Baby, there wasn't a sound up there. Wasn't it kind of spooky?" Sherry's mood stayed giddy, and Patty gladly fell in with it. They went to another bar they liked and drank for an hour or so, slowly, keeping a gloss on things, feeling humorous and excited like schoolgirls on a trip together. At length, they decided to go to the Parnassus, find somebody with a car, and scare up a cruising party. As they crossed to the hotel, Sherry surprised Patty by throwing a look at the old office building, giving a shrug that may have been half shudder. "Jesus, it was like being under the ocean or something in there, wasn't it, Patty?" This echo of her own dread made Patty look again at her friend. Then Arnold, the vendor, stepped out from the newsstand and blocked their way. The uncharacteristic aggressiveness gave Patty a nasty twinge. Arnold was unlovely. There was a babyish fatness and redness about every part of him. His scanty red hair alternately suggested infancy or feeble age, and his one eyeless socket, with its weepy red folds of baggy lid, made his whole face look as if it screwed to cry. Over all his red, ambling softness there was a bright blackish glaze of inveterate filth, and moronic though his manner was most of the time, Patty felt a cunning about him, something sly and corrupt. The cretinous, wet-mouthed face he now thrust close to the girls seemed somehow to be that of a grease-painted con-man, not an imbecile. As if it were a sour fog that surrounded the newsman, fear entered Patty's nostrils and dampened the skin of her arms. Arnold raised his hand. Pinched between his smudgy thumb and knuckle were an envelope and a $50 bill. "A man said to read this, Patty." Arnold's childish intonation now struck Patty as an affectation, like his dirtiness, part of a chosen disguise. "He said the money was to pay you to read it. It's a trick. He gave me $20. Arnold giggled. The sense of cold-blooded deception in the man made Patty's voice shake when she questioned him about the man who'd given him the commission. He remembered nothing. An arm and a voice in a dark car that pulled up and sped off. "Well, how is she supposed to read it?" Sherry prodded. "Should she be by a window? Should she wear anything special?" But Arnold had no more to tell them, and Patty willingly gave up on him to escape the revulsion he so unexpectedly roused in her. They went into the lobby with the letter, but such was its strangeness, so engrossingly lurid were the fleeting images that came clear for them, that they ended taking it back to the bar, getting a booth and working over it with the aid of beers and lively surroundings. The document was in the form of an unsigned letter that covered 2 pages in a lucid, cursive script of bizarre elegance, and that ran thus. "Dear girls, how does a Shoggoth lord go wooing? You do not even guess enough to ask. Then let it be asked and answered for you. As it is written, the Shoggoth lord stumbleth unto his belusted. Lo, he cometh heavily unto her, upon alien feet. From the sunless sea, from under the mountains of ice, cometh the mighty Shoggoth lord unto her. Dear, dear girls, where is this place the Shoggothoi come from? In your tender, sensual ignorance, you might well lack the power to be astonished by the prodigious gulfs of space and time this question probes. But let it once more be asked and answered for you. Thus has the answer been written. Shun the gulf beneath the peaks, the caverned ocean black as night, where star-spawned gods made their retreat from the slowly freezing world of light. For even star-spawn may grow weak, while what has been its slave gains strength. Even star-spawn's will may break, while slaves feed on their lords at length. Sweet harlots, darling, heedless trollops, you cannot imagine the Shoggoth Lord's mastery of shapes. His race is bred smaller since modern man last met with it. Oh, but the Shoggoth Lords are limber now, supremest polymorphs, though what they are beneath all else is horror itself. But how is it they press their loving suit? What do they murmur to her they hotly crave? You must know that the Shoggoth craves her fat with panic, full of the psychic juices of despair. Therefore, he taunts her with their ineluctable union. Therefore he pipes and flutes to her his bold, seductive lyric, while he vows with a burning glare in his myriad eyes that she'll be his. Thus he sings. Your veil shall be the wash of blood that dims and drowns your dying eyes. You'll have for bridesmaids pain and dread, for vows you'll jabber blasphemies. My scalding flesh will be your gown, and agony your bridal song. You shall both be my bread, and senses reeling watch me fed. O maids, prepare her swiftly, speedily her loins unlace, her tender paps anoint, and bear unto my seething face. Thus, dear girls, he ballads and rondelets his belusted. Thus he waltzes her spirit through dark, empty halls of expectation, of always hearkening horror, until the dancers reach that last, closed room of consummation. 2. As many times as the girls flung these pages onto the table, they picked them up again after short hesitation. Both Sherry and Patty were very marginal readers, but the flashes of coherent imagery in the letter kept them coming back to the cryptic parts, trying to pick the lock of their meaning. They held menace even in their very calligraphy, whose baroque, barbed elegance seemed sardonic and alien. The mere sonority of some of the obscure passages evoked vivid images, a sense of murky submersion in benthic pressures of fearful expectation, while unseen giants abided nearby in the dark. The document's cumulative effect on Patty was more of melancholy than fear. The John who wrote it was a hurt freak, sure, but the letter-writing types blew it off that way and never came to dealing harm. The girls had done some blow from Sherry's vial to clear their heads from the beers, and Patty's body was liking it. She was feeling stronger than she had for days. This letter-writer's words were strange, yes. This incredible gloominess hung over them. But then, bottom line, this was a very easy 50 books. Sherry, on the other hand, got a little freaked about it. She'd started drinking much earlier in the day. She'd had a lot more blow than Patty, and her nerves now were wearing down. She was still laughing at things, but the humor was very thin. I'll tell you what, girl, these are weird vibes I'm getting today. You know what? I did kind of hear, like, music behind the door. Now we get this shit. And she swept her hands at the pages, but not touching them, as a woman might try to shoo off a spider. You know what let's do? Let's have a sleepover at your place. I'll come sleep over, just like slumber parties. That'd be fun, but you sleep in my bed, no kicking, okay? Sherry cawed with relieved laughter, her sleep kicking a joke with them. Sensing Sherry's fear, her desperation not to be alone tonight, scared Patty in turn. They walked the sidewalks through the almost night, headlights blazing everywhere, both of them so glad of each other's company, it almost embarrassed them. At the all-night Safeway, they got provisions, sloe gin, vodka, bags of ice, 7-Up, bags of chips and puffs and cookies and candy bars. They repaired with their purchases to Patty's place. She had a small cottage in a 4-cottage court, with very old people living in the other 3 units. The girls shoved the bed into the corner so they could drop pillows against all the walls to lean back on. They turned on the radio and the TV, then got out the phone book and started making joke calls to people with funny names while eating, drinking, smoking, watching, listening, and bantering with each other. Their consciousness outlasted their provisions, but not by long. Soon back to back they slept, bathed and laved by the gently burbling sound wash and the ash-grey light of pulsing images. They woke to a day that was sunny, windy, and smogless. They rose at high, glorious noon and walked to a coffee shop for breakfast. The breeze was combing buttery light into the waxen fronds of the palms, while the Hollywood hills seemed most opulently brocaded under the sky's flawless blue, with the silver green of sagebrush and sumac. As they ravened breakfast, they plotted borrowing a car and taking a drive. Then Sherry's pimp walked in. She waved him over brightly, but Patty was sure she was as disappointed as herself. Rudy took a chair long enough to inform Sherry how lucky she was he'd run into her, since he had something important for her that afternoon. Contemptuously, he snatched up the bill and paid for both girls. Sherry left in tow and gave Patty a rueful wave from the door. Patty's appetite left her. She dawdled over coffee and stepped at last, unwillingly, out into the day's polychrome splendor. Its very clarity took on a sinister quality of remorselessness. Behold, the whole world and all its children moved under the glaring sun's brutal, endless revelation. Nothing could hide, not in this world, though of course there were other worlds, where beings lie hidden immemorially. She shivered as if something had crawled across her. The thoughts had passed through Patty, but were not hers. She sat on a bus-stop bench and tightly crossed her arms as if to get a literal hold on herself. The strange thoughts, by their feeling, she knew instinctively to be echoes raised somehow by what they had read last night. Away with them, then. The creep had had more than his money's worth of reading from her already, and now she would forget those unclean pages. As for her depression, it was a freakish sadness caused by the spoiling of her holiday with Sherry, and it was silly to give in to it. Thus she rallied herself and got to her feet. She walked a few blocks without aim, somewhat stiff and resolute. At length, the sunlight and a natural health of body had healed her mood, and she fell into a pleasant, veering ramble down miles of Hollywood residential streets, relishing the cheap cuteness of the houses and the lushness of their long-planted trees and gardens. Almost she left the entire city. A happy, rushing sense of her freedom grew upon her, and she suddenly pointed out to herself that she had nearly $400 in her purse. She came within an ace of swaggering into a Greyhound station with 2 quickly packed suitcases and buying a ticket to either San Diego or Santa Barbara, whichever had the earlier departure time, with brave suddenness to simplify her life and remove it, at a stroke, from the evil that had seemed to haunt it recently. In the end, it was Patty's laziness that made her veer from this decision. The packing, the bus ride, the looking for a new apartment, the searching for a job, so many details and hours of tedium. And as she meditated on the toilsomeness of it all, she found that these familiar old Hollywood residential streets were taking on a new allure. And really, how could she leave? After what had it been? 4, 5 years? After so long, Hollywood was basically her hometown. These shady little streets with their root-buckled sidewalks, they were so well known to her, yet so full of interest. She had turned onto a still, green block, gorgeously scented and overhung by huge old pepper trees. She was some few dozen yards into the block before she realized that the freeway had cut it off at the far end. But at that end, a black-on-yellow arrow indicated a narrow egress, so she kept walking. Then, several houses ahead, a very large man in overalls appeared, dragging a huge German shepherd across the lawn. Patty saw a new brown van parked by the curb, and recognized it and the man at once. The vehicle was one of two belonging to Fatface's stray refuge, and the man was one of his two full-time collectors. He had the struggling brute by the neck with a noosed stick. He stopped and looked at Patty with some intensity as she approached. The vine-drowned cottage whose lawn he stood on was dark, tight shut, and seemed deserted, as did the entire block, and it struck Patty that the man could have spotted the dog by chance and might now be thinking it hers. She smiled and shook her head as she came up. "He's not mine. I don't even live around here." Something in the way her words echoed down the stillness of the street gave Patty a pang. She was sure they had made the collector's eyes narrow. He was tall, round, and smooth, with a face of his employer's type, though not as jovial. He was severely club-footed and bloat-legged on the left, as well as being inordinately bellied, all things to which the coveralls lent a merciful vagueness. The green baseball cap he wore somehow completed the look of ill balance and slow wit that the man wore. But as she got nearer, already wanting to turn and run the other way, she received a shocking impression of strength in the uncouth figure. The man had paused in a half-turn and was partly crouched, not a position of firm leverage. The dog, whose paws and muzzle showed some Bernard, surely weighed well over 150 pounds, and it fought with all its might, but its struggles sent not even a tremor through its captor's massive arm. The animal was as immovably moored as to a tree. Patty edged to one side of the walk, pretending a wariness of the dog, which its helplessness made droll, and moved to pass. The collector's hand, as if absently, pressed down on the noose. The beast's head seemed to swell. Its struggles grew more galvanic and constricted by extreme distress. And while thus smoothly he began throttling the beast, the collector cast a glance up and down the block and stepped into Patty's path, effortlessly dragging the animal with him. They stood face to face, very near. The ugly mathematics of peril swiftly clicked in her brain. The mass, the force, the time, all were sufficient. The next couple of moments could finish her. With a jerk he could kill the dog, drop it, seize her, and thrust her into the van. Indeed, the dog was at the very point of death. The collector began to smile nastily, and his breath came, foul and oddly cold, gusting against her face. Then something began to happen to his eyes. They were rolling up like a man's when he's coming, but they didn't roll white. They were rolling up a jet black, two glossy obsidian globes eclipsing from below the watery blue ones. Her lungs began to gather air to scream. A taxicab swung onto the street. The collector's grip eased on the half-unconscious dog. He stood blinking furiously, and it seemed he could not unwind his bulky body from the menacing tension it had taken on. He stood, still frozen on the very threshold of assault, and the cold foulness still gusted from him with the labour of his breathing. In another instant, Patty's reflexes fired, and she was released with a leap from the curb out into the street. But there was time enough for her to have the thought she knew that stench the blinking gargoyle breathed. And then she was in the cab. The driver sullenly informed her then of her luck in catching him on his special shortcut to a freeway on-ramp. She looked at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. More gently, he asked her destination, and without thought, she answered, the Greyhound station. Flight, with sweet, simple motion to cancel Hollywood, and its walking ghosts of murder, and its lurking plunderers of the body, and its nasty, nameless scribblers of letters whose pleasure it was to defile the mind with nightmares. But of course she must pack. She rerouted the driver to her apartment. This involved a doubling back that took them across the street of her encounter. The van was still parked by the curb, but neither collector nor dog was in sight. Oddly, the van seemed to be moving slightly, rocking as if with interior movement of fitful vigour. Her look was brief, from a half-block distance, but in the shady stillness the subtle tremoring made a vivid impression. Then she remembered Fat Face. Of course, she could report the driver to him. His majestic face, his bland avuncular smile, the comforting aura of him flooded soothingly over her fear. What, after all, had happened? A creepy disabled guy with an eye infection had been dangerously tempted to rape her. Fat Face would talk to him. Fat Face would vigorously protect her from any further danger. And meanwhile, in the telling of the story, Patty smiled, planning her pretty embarrassment at the intimate topic. She would express her girlish gratitude so warmly. It would lead smoothly to the tender seduction of her fantasy. She rerouted the taxi yet again, not without first giving the driver a $10 tip in advance. She had him drop her on the boulevard. She would cop a little blow and get some donuts before going back to the Parnassus, and across the street to Fat Face. But instead, she spent the rest of the afternoon on the boulevard. Having kindly Fat Face close on hand to fix things neutralized the terror of the near rape. Patty believed in finding effective antidotes to her problems. Fat Face, the remedy, was on hand, so there was no rush about it. She did a couple healthy knuckles full of flake in the ladies' room of Dunkin' Donuts, and then went out and enjoyed 2 chocolate-frosted old-fashions with thickly creamed coffee. She mused that while there was relief in Fat Face's presence, there was a creepiness about his entire enterprise that was a real obstacle to visiting him, and that she might as well put it off till tomorrow morning and just relax today. It was cruel, of course, to see deformity as creepy. That had to be what was freaking her in Fat Face's building yesterday. And it was unfair, even that huge creep, strangling the dog one-handed, his eyes fixed on her, rolling black. Even he deserved sympathy for his deformity. That was what was so great about Fat Face. He was so humanitarian. But the flip side was that his humanitarianism associated him with all these creeps. She went to a double bill, and then went to another one, a block away. She nursed a flat of peppermint schnapps and honked discreet knuckles of flake, all snug up in her corner balcony seat, mind-surfing through the bright, delirious tumult of car chases and exploding spacecraft and skull-spraying gunfights and screaming falls from the peaks of skyscrapers. This was relaxation, her favorite way to spend an afternoon. But her mood began to falter as the movies ground on. She kept thinking of her almost attacker. It was not his grotesque image that nagged her so much as it was a fugitively familiar aura he had about him. The more she worked to shake this thought, the more its persistence frightened her, and the more vivid grew the haunting sensations. A cold malignance gusted off the man like a breath of some alien world's atmosphere. Yet it was an air somehow obscurely known to her. What dream of her own, now lost to her, had shown her that world of dread and wonder and colossal age that now she caught and knew the scent of in this man? The thought was easy to shake off as a freak of mood, but it was insistent in its return, like a fly that kept landing on her. After the movies, when she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the noise and the blaze of neon and headlights in the dusk made her edgy. She felt cold. It may have been the flake still revving in her system, but her legs seemed to feel a hollow thrumming, a big, uneasy emptiness somewhere beneath her footsoles. She walked for a while, picking up a new flat of schnapps. Finally, she stepped into a booth and called sherry. Her friend had just got home, exhausted from a multiple trick, and wearing a few bruises from a talk afterward with Rudy. "Why don't I come over, Sherry, hey?" "No, Patty, I'm wrung out, girl. You feel okay?" "Sure. So get to sleep, then." "No, hey now, you come over if you want to, Patty. I'm just going to be dead to the world is all." "What do you mean? If you're tired, and I'll catch you later. So long." She could hear, but not change, the anger and disappointment in her own voice. It told her, when she'd hung up but remained staring at the phone, how close to the territory of fear she stood. Full night had surrounded her glass booth. Against the fresh purple dark, all the street's scribbly neon squirmed and swam, like sea things of blue and rose and gold, bannering and twisting cryptically over the drowned pavements. And, almost as though she expected a watery death, Patty could not for a moment step from the booth out onto those pavements. Their lethal cold strangeness lay, if not under sea, then surely in an alien poisonous atmosphere that would scorch her lungs. For a ridiculous instant, her body defied her will. Then she set her sights on a bar, half a block distant. She plunged from the booth and grimly made for that haven. Some 3 hours later, no longer cold, Patty was walking to Sherry's. It was a weeknight, and the stillness of the residential streets was not unpleasant. The tree-crowded street lamps shed a light that was lovely with its whiskey gloss. The street names on their little banners of blue metal had a comic flavour to her tongue, and she called out each as it came into view. Sherry, after all, had said to come over. The petty cruelty of waking her seemed to Patty, under the genial excuse of the alcohol, merely prankish. So she sauntered through sleeping Hollywood, knowing the night walker's exhilaration of being awake in a dormant world. Sherry lived in a stucco cottage that was a bit tackier than Patty's, though larger, each cottage possessing a little driveway and a garage in back. And though there was a light on in the living room, it was up the driveway that Patty went, deciding with sudden impishness to spook her friend. She crept around the rear corner and stole up to the screened window of Sherry's bedroom, meaning to make noises through a crack if one had been left open. The window was in fact fully raised, though a blind was drawn within. Even as Patty leaned close, she heard movement inside the darkened room. In the next instant, a gust of breeze came up and pushed back the blind within. Sherry was on her back in the bed, and somebody was on top of her, so that all Patty could see of her was her arms and her face, which stared round-eyed at the ceiling as she was rocked again and again on the bed. Patty viewed that surging, grappling labour for 2 instants, no more, and retreated, almost staggering, in a primitive reflex of shame, more deep-lying in her than any of the sophistications of her adult professional life. Shame and a weird, childish glee. She hurried out to the sidewalk. Her head rang, and she felt giggly and frightened to a degree that managed to astonish her, even through her liquor. What was with her? She'd been paid to watch far grosser things than a simple coupling. On the other hand, there had been a foul smell in the bedroom, and a nagging hint of music, too, she thought. A faint, unpleasant, twisty tune, coming from somewhere indefinite. Those vague feelings quickly yielded to the humorous side of the accident. She walked to the nearest main street and found a bar. In it she killed half an hour with 2 further doubles, and then, reckoning enough time had passed, walked back to Sherry's. The living room light was still on. Patty rang the bell and heard it inside, a rattly probe of noise that raised no stir of response. All at once, she felt a light rush of suspicion, like some long-legged insect scuttling daintily up her spine. She felt that, as once before in the last few days, the silence she was hearing concealed a presence, not an absence. But why should this make her begin, ever so slightly, to sweat? It could be Sherry playing possum. Trying by abruptness to throw off her fear, Patty seized the knob. The door opened, and she rushed in, calling, "Ready or not, 1, 2, 3. Before she was fully in the room, her knees buckled under her, for a fiendish stench filled it. It was a carrion smell, a fierce, damp rankness that bit and pierced her nose. It was so palpable an assault, it seemed to crawl all over her, to wriggle through her scalp and stain her flesh as if with brimstone and grave slime. Clinging still to the doorknob, she looked woozily about the room, whose sloppy normality, coming to her as it did through that surreal fetor, struck her almost eerily. Here was the litter of wrappers, magazines and dishes, thickest around the couch, so familiar to her. The TV, on low, was crowned with ashtrays and beer cans, while on the couch that it faced lay a freshly opened bag of Fritos. But it was from the bedroom door, partly ajar, that the nearly visible miasma welled most thickly, as from its source, and it would be in the bedroom that Sherry would lie. She would be lying dead in its darkness. For, past experience and description though it was, the stench proclaimed that meaning grim and clear. Death. Patty turned behind her to take a last clean breath and stumbled toward the bedroom. Every girl ran the risk of rough trade. It was an ugly and lonely way to die. With the dark, instinctive knowledge of their sisterhood, Patty knew that it was only laying out and covering up that her friend needed of her now. She shoved inward on the bedroom door, throwing a broken rung of light upon the bed. It and the room were empty. Empty save the near-physical mass of the stench. It was upon the bed that the reek fumed and writhed most nastily. The blankets and sheets were drenched with some vile fluid and pressed into sodden seams and folds. The coupling she had glimpsed and snickered at, what unspeakable species of intercourse had it been? And Sherry's face staring up from under the shadowed form's lascivious rocking. Had there been more to read in her expression than the slack-faced shock of sex? Then Patty moaned, "Oh, Jesus God!" Sherry was in the room. She lay on the floor, mostly under the bed, only her head and shoulders protruding, her face to the ceiling. There was no misreading its now frozen look. It was a face wherein the recognition of absolute pain and fear had dawned, even as death arrived. Dead she surely was. Living muscles did not achieve utter fixity. Tears jumped up in Patty's eyes. She staggered into the living room, fell on the couch, and wept. "Oh, Jesus God," she said again, softly now. She went to the kitchenette and got a dish towel, tied it around her nose and mouth, and returned to the bedroom. Sherry would not, at least, be half thrust from sight like a broken toy. Her much-used body would have a shred of dignity that her life had never granted it. She bent and hooked her hands under those dear, bare shoulders. She pulled and, with her pull's excess force, fell backward to the floor, for that which she fell hugging to her breasts needed no such force to move its lightness. It was not Sherry, but a dreadful upper fragment of her that Patty hooked. Sherry's head and shoulders, one of her arms, gone were her fat, funny feet they used to laugh at, for she ended now in a charred stump of rib cage. As a little girl might clutch some unspeakable doll, Patty lay embracing tightly that which made her scream, and scream again. Three. Valium, Compazine, Meloril, Stelazine, gorgeous technicolored tabs and capsules, bright-hued pillars holding up the temple of rest, long afternoons of Tuinol and TV, night sweats and quiet, groggy mornings. Patty was in county for more than a week. She had found all there was to be found of her friend. Dismemberment by acid was a new wrinkle, and Sherry got some press, but in a world of trash-bag murders and mass graves uncovered in quiet backyards, even a death like Sherry's could hope for only so much coverage. Patty's bafflement made her call the detectives assigned to the case at least once a day. With gruff tact, they heard through her futile rummagings among the things she knew of Sherry's life and background, but soon knew she was helpless to come up with anything material. Much as Patty craved the medicated rest the hospital thrust on her, a lingering dread marred her days of drug-buoyed ease. For she could be waked, even from the glassiest days, by a sudden sense that the number of people surrounding her was dwindling, that everywhere they were stealing off or vanishing, and that the hospital, and even the city, was growing empty around her. She put it down to the hospital itself, its constant shifts of bodies, its wheelings in and out on silent gurneys. She obtained a generous scrip for Valium, and had herself discharged, hungry for the closer comfort of her friends. A helpful doctor was leaving the building as she did, and gave her a ride. With freakish embarrassment about her trade and her world, Patty had him drop her at a coffee shop some blocks from the Parnassus. When he had driven off, she started walking. The dusk was just fading. It was Saturday night, but it was also the middle of a 3-day weekend, as she had learned with surprise from the doctor, and the traffic on both pavement and asphalt was remarkably light. Somehow, it had a small-town-on-Sunday feel, and alarm woke in her and struggled in its heavy Valium shackles, for this was as if the confirmation of her frightened hallucinations. Her fear mounted as she walked. She pictured the Parnassus with an empty lobby, and imagined that she saw the traffic beginning everywhere to turn off the street she walked on, so that in a few moments it might stretch deserted for a mile either way. But then she saw the many lively figures through the beloved plate-glass windows. She half ran ahead, and as she waited with happy excitement for the light, she saw Fatface up in his window. He spotted her just when she did him, and beamed and winked. Patty waved and smiled and heaved a deep sigh of relief that nearly brought tears. This was true medicine, not pills, but friendly faces in your home community, warm feelings and simple neighborliness. She ran forward at the walk signal. There was a snag before she reached the lobby, for Arnold from his wooden cave threw at her a leer of wet intensity that scared her, even as she recognized that some kind of frightened greeting was intended by the grimace. There was such speculation in his look. But then she had pushed through the glass doors, and was in the warm ebullience of shouts and hugs and jokes and droll nudges. It was sweet to bathe in that bright, raucous communion. She had called the deskman that she was coming out, and for a couple of hours various friends whom the word had reached strolled in to greet her. She luxuriated in her pitied celebrity, received little gifts, and gave back emotional kisses of thanks. It ought to have lasted longer, but the night was an odd one. Not much was happening in town, and everybody seemed to have action lined up in Oxnard or Encino or some other bizarre place. A few stayed to work the home grounds, but they caught a subdued air from the place's emptiness at a still young hour. Patty took a couple more Valium and tried to seem like she was peacefully resting in a lobby chair. To fight her stirrings of unease, she took up the paperback that was among the gifts given her. She hadn't even noticed by whom. It had a horrible face on the cover, and was entitled, At the Mountains of Madness. If she had not felt the need for some potent distraction, some weighty ballast for her listing spirit, she would never have pieced out the Ciceronian rhythms of the narrative style. But when, with frightened tenacity, she had waded several pages into the tale, the riverine prose, suddenly limpid, snatched her and bore her upon its flowing clarity. The Valium seemed to perfect her uncanny concentration, and where her vocabulary failed her, she made smooth leaps of inference and always landed square on the necessary meaning. And so for hours, in the slowly emptying lobby that looked out upon the slowly emptying intersection, she wound through the icy territories of the impossible and down into the gelid nethermost cellars of all world and time, where stupendous eons lay in pictured shards, and massive sentient forms still stirred and fed and mocked the light. Strangely, she began to find underlinings about 2/3 of the way through. All the marked passages involved references to shoggoths. It was a word whose mere sound made Patty's flesh stir. She searched the flyleaf and inner covers for explanatory inscriptions, but found nothing. When she laid the book down in the small hours, she sat amid a near-total desertion that she scarcely noticed. Something tugged powerfully at memory, something that memory dreaded to admit. She realized that in reading the tale, she had taken on an obscure, terrible weight. She felt as if impregnated by an injection of tainted knowledge whose grim fruit, an almost physical mass of cryptic threat, lay a-ripening in her now. She took a third-floor room in the Parnassus for the night. For the simplest effort, like calling a cab, lay under a pall of futility and sourceless menace. She lay back, and her exhausted mind plunged instantly through the rotten flooring of consciousness, straight down into the abyss of dreams. She dreamed of a city like Hollywood, but the city's walls and pavements were half alive, and they could feel premonitions of something that was drawing near them. All the walls and streets of the city waited in a cold sweat fear under a blackly overcast sky. She herself, Patty grasped, was the heart and mind of the city. She lay in its midst, and its vast, cold fear was hers. She lay, and somehow she knew the things that were drawing near her giant body. She knew their provenance in huge, blind voids where stood walls older than the present face of Earth. She knew their long, cunning toll to reach her own cringing frontiers. Giant worms they were, or jellyfish, or merely huge clots of boiling substance. They entered her deserted streets, gliding convergingly. She lay like carrion that lives and knows the maggots assault on it. She lay in her central citadel, herself the morsel they sped toward, piping their lust from foul, corrosive jaws. She woke late Sunday afternoon, drained and dead of heart. She sat in bed watching the big green fly patiently hammer itself against the window pane where the gold light flooded in. Endlessly it fought the impossible, battering with its frail, bejeweled head. With swift fury and pain, Patty jumped out of bed and snatched up her blouse. She ran to the window and, with her linen bludgeon, killed the fly. Across the street, in a window just 1 story higher than her own, sat Fatface. She stood looking back for a moment, embarrassed by her little savagery, but warmed by the way the doctor's smile was filled with gentle understanding, as if he read the anguish the act was born of. She suddenly realized she was wearing only her bra. His smile grew a shade merrier at her little jolt of awareness, and she knew he understood this too, that this was inadvertence, and not a hooker's come-on. And so, with a swift excitement, she turned it into coquetry, and applied her blouse daintily to her breasts. This was the natural moment. She had been right to wait, because now her tender fantasy would bloom with perfect spontaneity. She pointed to herself with a smile, and then to Fatface with inquiry. How he beamed then! Did she even see his eyes and lips water? He nodded energetically. With thumb and forefinger, she signalled a short interval. As she left the window, she noted the arrival down the sidewalk of a gaggle of hydrotherapy patients, several with leashed strays in tow. It chilled her somewhat. And would the patient's arrival interfere with the intimate interview she imagined? Her preparations slowed. She stepped down to the lobby some 10 minutes later, and walked slowly to stand by the front doors. The lobby was empty, and so were the sidewalks. All lay in a sunny Sunday desolation. It was dreamlike, beautiful in a way, but it caused her a delicate shudder too. She stepped outside and looked around her, and felt suddenly the craziness of kinky sexual charities, such as she intended. Maybe she should forget it, just go party somewhere. And right then, as she stood there, a car full of her friends pulled up to the curb in front of her. In a chorus, they invited her to join them. They were off to cruise, maybe crash out of town. Had some parties they knew about. Almost Patty went, but then she noted that Sherry's kid sister, Penny, was in the car. She shuddered at so near a reminder and waved them off with a laugh. She began to move down the sidewalk, weighing how strong her urge to visit Fatface still was, not looking up toward him because maybe she would just walk on down to the bar. And then Arnold lurched from his booth and made a grab for her arm. She was edgy and quick and jumped away. He seemed to fear leaving the booth's proximity and came no nearer, but pleaded with her from where he stood. "Please, Patty, come here and listen." Like a thunderbolt, the elusive memory of last night now struck Patty. Shoggoth was eerie, and that whole story familiar, because they were precisely what that letter had been all about. She was stunned that she could so utterly banish from her mind that lurid document. It had spooked Patty badly the night before her friend died. It had come from Arnold, and so had that book. That was the meaning of his look. The red moronic face glared at her urgently. "Please, Patty, I've had knowledge. Come here." He darted forward to catch her arm, and she sprang back, again the quicker, with a yelp. Arnold, thus drawn from the screening of his booth, froze fearfully. Patty looked up and thrilled to find Fatface looking down, not in amity, but in wrath upon Arnold. The newsman gaped and mumbled apologetically, as if to the sidewalk, "No, I said nothing. I only hinted." Joyfully, Patty sprang across the street, and in moments was flying up those green-carpeted stairs she had climbed once before with such reluctance. The oppression she had first found in these muted corridors was not gone from them. The quality of dread in some manner belonged there, but she outran it. She moved too quickly in her sunny fantasy to be overtaken by that heaviness. She ran down the fourth-floor hall, and at the door where Sherry had knelt giggling and she had balked, seized the knob and knocked simultaneously while pushing her way in, so impetuous was her rush toward benign sanity. There Fatface sat at a big desk by the window she'd always known him through. He was even grosser-legged and more bloat-bellied than his patients. It gave her a funny shock that did not change her amorous designs. He wore a commodious doctor's smock and slacks. His shoes were bulky, black, and orthopedically braced. Such a body less enkindled by spirit might have repelled. His, surmounted by the kindly beacon of his smile, seemed only grandfatherly, afflicted, dear. From somewhere there came, echoing as in a large enclosed space, a noise of agitated water and of animals, strangely conjoined. But Fatface was speaking. "My dear," he said, not yet rising, "you make an old fellow very, very happy." His voice was a marvel that sent half-lustful goose-flesh down her spine. It was an uncanny voice, reedy and wavering, and shot with flute-like notes of silver purity, sinfully melodious. That voice knew seductions, quite possibly, that Patty had never dreamed of. She was speechless and spread her arms in tender self-preservation. He sprang to his feet, and the surging pep with which his great bulk moved sent a new thrill down the lightning rod of her nerves. On pachydermous legs he leapt spry as a cat to a door behind his desk, and bowed her through. The noise of animals and churning water gusted fresher from the doorway. Perplexed, she entered. The room contained only a huge bowl-shaped hydrotherapy tub. Its walls were blank cement, save one, which was a bank of shuttered windows, through which the drenched clamour was pouting. She finally conquered disbelief, and realized a fact she had been struggling with all along. Those dozens of canine garglings and cat shrieks were sounds of agony and distress, not hospital sounds, torture chamber sounds. The door boomed shut with a strikingly ponderous rumble, followed by a sharp click. Fatface, energetically unbuttoning his smock, said, "Go ahead and peek out, sweet heedless trollop. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Soon we'll all dine on lovely fleshmen and women, not paltry vermin." Patty gaped at the lurid musicality of his speech, struggling to receive its meaning. The doctor was shucking his trousers. It appeared that he wore a complex rubber suit, heavily strapped and buckled under his clothes. Dazed, Patty opened a shutter and looked out. She saw a huge indoor pool, as the sounds had suggested, but not of the same shape and brightly chlorinated blue she expected. It was an awesome, slime-black grotto that opened below her, bordered by rude, sea-bearded rocks of cyclopean size. The sooty, viscous broth of its waters boiled with bulging elephantine shapes. From those shapes, when she had grasped them, she tore her eyes with desperate speed, long instants too late for her sanity. Nightmare ought not to be so simply there before her, so dizzyingly adjacent to reality. That the shape should be such seething plasms, such cunning titan maggots as she had dreamed of, this was just half the horror. The other half was the human head that decorated each of those boiling multimorphs, a comic excrescence from the nightmare mass. This and the rain of panicked beasts that fell from cagework above the pool and became in their frenzies both the toys and the food of the pulpy abominations. She turned slack-mouthed to Fatface. He stood by the great empty tub, working at the system of buckles on his chest. "Do you understand, my dear? Please try. Your horror will improve your tang. Your veil shall be the wash of blood that dims and drowns your dying eyes. You see, we find it easier to hold most of the shape with suits like these. We could mimic the entire body, but far more effort and concentration would be required." He gave a last pull, and the row of buckles split crisply open. Ropey, purple gelatin gushed from his suit front into the tub. Patty ran to the door, which had no knob. As she tore her nails against it and screamed, she remembered the fly at the window, and heard Fatface continue behind her. "So we just imitate the head, and we never dissolve it, not to risk resuming it faultily and waking suspicions. Please struggle." She looked back and saw huge palps, like dreadful comic phalluses, spring from the tub of slime that now boiled with movement. She screamed. "Oh, yes," fluted the fat face that now bobbed on the purple simmer. Patty's arms smoked where the palps took them. She was plucked from the floor as lightly as a struggling roach might be. "Oh, yes, dear girl. You'll have for bridesmaids pain and dread. For vows you'll jabber blasphemies." As he brought her to hang above the cauldron of his acid body, she saw his eyes roll jet black. He lowered her feet into himself. A last time before shock took her, Patty threw the feeble tool of her voice against the massive walls. She kicked as her feet sank into the scorching gelatin, kicked till her shoes dissolved, till her feet and ankles spread nebulae of liquefying flesh within the Shoggoth Lord's greedy substance. Then her kicking slowed, and she sank more deeply in.
If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time.